أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, in the wake of the incident with our dear brother George Floyd, that the world saw this heinous brutality, something that we have known about the frequency of such things for a very long time, and now yet again we see it on camera and we see it unfold across the world. The reaction to it. It sparked a conversation, and ICNA CSJ has been having weekly webinars addressing what we can do about it. And today we are privileged to have two speakers who will be addressing this issue about how we stand up against injustice, how we stand up against brutality, structural racism, systematic discrimination. And so I want to begin by introducing our two speakers. And then after that, inshallah, I'll be asking them a couple of questions. The reason why we brought these two distinguished gentlemen on is because both of them, in addition to their academic credentials and in addition to their reputations within the community, in the African American community, in the Muslim community, and where the two intersect, the specific thing about both of these gentlemen is that they have dedicated much of their lives to combating systematic structural racism and systematic discrimination by doing grassroots level work within the community. Imam Khalid Griggs, as we know, is the Vice President of Civic Engagement for the Islamic Circle of North America. And we know that that is a title that he holds. But in terms of the program that we have here today, I think the more important thing is that he is a grassroots level organizer and activist located in his hometown of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where he serves on a number of initiatives. Specifically regarding what we're going to be discussing today, he has worked with a number of youth in his community with the local school district, combating the school to prison pipeline by motivating and encouraging young people to pursue higher education, and a number of other initiatives that he's been involved in. Brother Jamil also is a veteran educator of 20 plus years, father, mentor. He's a Black business owner and grassroots level community organizer in Southern Dallas, where he currently is the assistant imam at Masjid al-Quran. And they operate in the wake of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. They've been doing grab and go feeding program for children under 18. In addition, they do a number of programs to facilitate youth, including helping single fathers and young parents, as well as a number of other programs that help develop the social and emotional IQs of the men and children living in the Southern Dallas community. So with that, let's go ahead and get this started. Imam Khalid, the first question is to you. We've seen a number of protests across the country, and we know how important that protest is in bringing change. But can you please lay out the grand scheme of things? What's the role of protests, and what's the next step, and what's the role of grassroots in all of this?
Yeah, very, very good question. You know, there are many, particularly in the Muslim community in this country, who feel that there's really no role for protests in American society, that all you do is go out, blow off a little steam, and everything goes back to the way that it was. But I think we have to pay a much closer attention to the history of this nation, and particularly as it relates to social justice issues. There have been no major significant social legislation that has been passed in this nation with the predecessor or the preceding protests and demonstrations, whether we're talking about women's right to vote, whether we're talking about civil rights, whether we're talking about human rights, whether we're talking about issues relating to Native Americans. In every aspect of American social change, every event, every major piece of legislation has been preceded by the public demonstrating that they're tired of it, they don't want to take this anymore. So protests, whereas we recognize the limitation of just demonstrating and just decrying what's presently going on, they play a major role in the social change process here in this country. But of course, and we'll get into it throughout the rest of the discussion, but it's just beginning. It's the opening vow. But I do want to caution us about one thing and trying to put a quick historical context. Uh, in the history of the late 20th and this early 21st century in the United States, there has probably been no protest that have resulted in such quick action, folks attempting to solve major problems. We've had a long litany since Trayvon Martin, which was probably in more recent times the case that gets attention in this country. And there were a lot of demonstrations, and we can just go down the line with so many. But there was something about this particular action, just how brazen it was, just how callous disregard for human life. And so, in a historical note, and then I'll be quiet here, but historically, we have to be prepared and we have to not ignore white backlash. And as these police departments, like in Minneapolis and what had already happened in Camden, New Jersey, these police departments were basically shut down and reconstituted with something that was more friendly operations. In 1917, 10,000 African Americans walked down the streets of Fifth Avenue in New York in a silent protest. The silent protest was because of acts like this: police brutality, police killing folks, people coming back from the war or entering into the military and coming with their soldier uniforms on and getting hanged and this kind of thing. And then certain positive changes were made. But then in 1919, we have a tremendous white backlash against even the smallest advances for people of African descent in this country, with the bloodiest year maybe in U.S. history as far as race riots and attacks on folks. So I think that even though we're very happy to see what's going on, we need to stay ever vigilant. I'm not saying that there's going to be a race war, but there are elements within American society now who have been itching for this for a long time.
Absolutely. And I think, what we're seeing is people who are going out and protesting there. A lot of times we, especially in the Muslim community, we've had these discussions. What is the purpose of these protests? And
Mhm.
ultimately, what community is it that we're trying to serve? And which community is it that is suffering from injustice? And we know that in this conversation of police brutality, as well as the criminalization process and these tactics used by the court systems and by the police, we know that it is the African American community overwhelmingly that suffers from this discrimination. And a lot of times, what we realize in the Muslim community, because of where we have gotten to, how far we have developed, it seems like we're kind of segregated ourselves. We have majority African American mosques located in some parts of town, and then in the suburbs we have mosques that were established and funded by immigrant Muslims. And a lot of times we don't see the disparity. So I want to bring in Brother Jamil, because especially I think Dallas is a perfect example. You're here in Dallas, and there's a big difference between southern Dallas and northern Dallas. And in southern Dallas, we have mosques like Masjid al Quran, where you are based, Masjid al Islam, right up the street from you, and a number of others. And then in northern Dallas, you have the mosques that are suburban mosques that are majority inhabited and ran and established by immigrant Muslims. But can you explain to us briefly what's the difference between South Dallas and North Dallas?
Dallas is very interesting, and it is, I wouldn't say it's unique, but it's interesting in that you know what side of town white people live on, you know what side of town black people live on, uh, and then economically you can tell what side poor people live on, what side wealthier people or well-to-do people live. And it's quite apparent that the white side of town is the side of town where the resources are, the wealth is. So when you come into South Dallas, you come into a vacuum, so to speak, and If you read some of the history on Dallas, you know how redlining was a very deliberate act of war upon the people in the southern sector, and the redlining, of course, caused this huge chasm in which the economics of the community pretty much failed. Right, so you can't get secure loans, you can't secure the things that you need to create a thriving economy, and so eventually the community dilapidates and and things just kind of go to waste. And so you can see the effects of redlining very clear here in southern Dallas. You can see the effects of utilizing infrastructure to create community division. That means creating and building interstates right through neighborhoods to segment the community and chop it up and create that broken home. And of course, in these economic vacuums, you have all of the effects that go along with it, such as the food deserts, such as the very poor education that's given to the youth in those communities. And so it just becomes like an avalanche of one problem after the next. But you have to understand it was all kind of generated from this white flight, right? So the idea of desegregation causing us to basically integrate into communities that were traditionally all white. Well, the integration idea don't fit well with white folks, and so white folks then begin, subsidized by the government, I might add, to move into suburban areas, right, where they secure housing. And that we know that a powerful asset in the growth of wealth is on home ownership. And so you get this white flight that then, like I said, leaves an economic vacuum in the background, and here we are, in the present reality of that, that redlining process and white flight.
And as you mentioned, you gave kind of a high level overview of a number of things, a number of problems in that community or issues in that community. And I know that you and the brothers and sisters at Masal Quran have come up with a number of interesting initiatives, and that's what we wanted to focus on. Because but I wanted to go back to Imam Khalid to ask you a question real quick in terms of what Brother Jamil said, that we are ultimately what we would like to do is to bring the Muslim community together, right? If we can come together as a community and we can really bring our resources together, there's a lot that we can do to empower one another. What Brother Jamil just explained about Dallas, and I think it's insane how it operates here, because I just moved here a couple years ago, and I talked to brothers in northern Dallas. Many of them, when I tell them about, hey, let's go to a masjid in South Dallas, I mean, it looks like I'm asking them to let's go out on a war mission or something. And we
It is.
in February we brought out 100 young guys, YM young Muslims members to the masjid. Once they got there, they were cool, but before they were like, "Oh, my parents aren't gonna let me go" and stuff. And this is something that is apparent in throughout the country. In Houston, we have pockets of neighborhoods located in various parts of the city. Imam Khalid, you traveled the entire country. Is this something that speaks to the entire country? Is this something that happens everywhere?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you're describing is just a microcosm of what's going on all over the
We
country.
can't hear you, brother.
It may, um,
I can hear you.
okay.
Okay, I
It's,
couldn't hear. I'm sorry.
okay. It's a microcosm of what's going on all over the country. And as a result, we may say North Dallas, South Dallas, and here in North Carolina, we talk about East Winston and West Winston and these kinds of things. But the reality is that it's been, this nation has had a very strategic plan, particularly the segregation of minority communities in this nation. And that suburban, and what we have now going on in the country is that those who were in the suburban communities before are now have come back into the inner cities. And they're coming back, not inner cities, the main boundaries of these cities. And it's kind of a reverse process going on now with gentrification. And so now in a number of cities like Washington, D.C., which I'm pretty familiar with, I lived there for a number of years, in a city like Washington, D.C., now the minority and African American communities are being pushed out into certain suburbs. They're not going out being pushed into the affluent suburbs because primarily they can't afford the high cost of living out there. But they are being pushed in designated areas outside, whereas in the inner city, the once poverty impoverished areas have become so gentrified that those who may have lived there years ago cannot afford to maybe even go to the latest Starbucks or whatever new kind of business that is coming to the community for the first time. Harlem is a very good example of that as well. And so this has not just been happenstance. This is a result of city planning. This is a result of strategic planning on the part of those who want to maximize the resources that any city may have. So Dallas is just a slice of Americana as it relates to how the various communities are strategically placed and then oftentimes walled in to like Donald Trump's, but it's an invisible wall that precludes being able to move from just one area to the next.
Can I ask you a loaded question, Imam Khalid?
Yes.
Okay, and I know that I'll get an unfiltered response. You just explained gentrification and the suburbs and the inner city. Where does the Muslim community fall into it? What's the general makeup of the Muslim community right now?
Okay, so you want me to be honest, right? I mean, you don't want me to hold back. Okay, what I think that we have to understand, particularly.
I can't hear Imam Khalid.
Can you hear me, Hassan?
I can hear you.
Okay, but I can't. So
I have my volume on maximum. I don't know what to do. Musab, is there anything you can do, or Ramiz?
Yeah, we'll ask Ramiz to take a look at it. Brother Jamil, can you hear me?
I hear you fine. I just can't hear Imam Khalid.
Okay, let me see. I'll contact Ramiz, but in the meantime.
See if he could do anything with that. Okay.
You are also on mute, Ramiz.
Sorry, I'm here. No, I'm watching. I can hear Imam Khalid as well. I don't know why Brother Jamil can't hear him. It doesn't give me any option to see if he why he can't. So Brother Jamil, you can hear me, right?
I hear you. I hear Brother Musab. I just cannot hear the Imam.
Okay. Why don't we do this, Imam Khalid? Go ahead and proceed with that question, and then after that, we'll go back to Brother Jamil. We had a number of questions for him, but can you hear Brother Jamil, Imam Khalid?
Yeah, I am fine. Yep.
Okay.
I can definitely hear.
Okay.
I think when we try to understand this question about where the various Muslim communities live, I think we have to go back and look at this issue of structural racism. And because of structural racism, African American people, whether we're talking about Muslim African Americans or non-Muslim African Americans, because of structural racism, what we have in this nation is a kind of an economic and social divide. And structural racism only implies that as we're talking about Black folks in particular, that folks in this country have been denied access and opportunities to take full advantage of the fruits of America. We have our immigrant brothers and sisters coming to this country, and I've had discussions with a number of brothers and sisters, and they admit that they looked at America as the land of milk and honey, that this is a place where you can really make it, you can advance. And the experience has been such that to a large degree, many who have come here with certain skills, certain skill sets, certain educational background, have been able to navigate and been able to get some of the spoils of American society. Whereas African American people who built the wealth of this nation that everyone benefits from today through almost 400 years of free labor, forced free labor, have been denied, structurally denied access. So what we have in this country, we have many of our brothers and sisters not being able to come into this land to take full advantage of what others are able to take advantage of. And so therefore, where folks live, where they work, their income level, and all of these things have been, to a large degree, it's the human effort that has allowed folks to accumulate, but they have not been impeded in the way that Black folks and Black Muslims have in this country. So, one point, and I'll be quiet here, but one point that I've often made reference to is that many of our immigrant brothers and sisters come into America and have come here with their immigration uh, status being identified as being white. And this white stamp on white on immigration papers, I look at it, it's almost like granting folks an honorary white status, meaning that you will have certain aspects like privilege that would have been denied and will continue to be denied. Things structurally change, like we're seeing some attempts like towards that now. So I think we shouldn't get it twisted because oftentimes people think that, Black, we buy into the stereotype that these people been here all this time. All they got to do is get up off their butt and do hard work. All they got to do is do this and do that, and denying, not recognizing, or not wanting, refusing to accept that there has been a systematic, structural denial of opportunities and access to Black folks in this country, which includes those of us who come from the African American community.
So with that, and I think that knowing that gives a responsibility upon Muslims, and upon all Muslims, that we have to fight against this system. We have to do something about it. And we discussed protests earlier on, but also grassroots activism is critical. And Brother Jamil, I wanted to ask you about, if we can go issue by issue, and who knows how far we'll get, but we really want to cover a couple of things here. Can you explain, and this kind of an example, because a lot of brothers and sisters are asking, I want to get involved. I want to do something. And last week we had a webinar with a CSJ webinar, and one of the brothers from Detroit, part of a group called Dream of Detroit, Brother Mark Crane, he said something very important. He said that as the Muslim community, in the wake of the George Floyd incident, tries to become, or is encouraged to become, you know, activists against racism in this country, we have to be careful not to circumvent our African American Muslim brothers and sisters who've been hard at work fighting this fight for a very long time. If anything, we need to come and back you guys up, saying you guys are doing the work. What can we do to help you? And so, for example, you're an educator in South Dallas. Can you explain what is the school to prison pipeline, and what are some of the things that you and the brothers and sisters are doing to combat that in your community?
Okay, inshallah. Brother Imam Khalid, I didn't hear your presentation, your last part, but based on the end that I heard, I know we're aligned. So, alhamdulillah for that.
Okay, okay.
But that's a great question, Brother Musab. The school, the prison pipeline, I actually went into education and history, African history, in undergrad with a specific purpose. And it was to come into these urban schools and figure out how they were essentially destroying Black boys. That was my initial intent. There was a book that I read by Dr. Kwanzaa Kunjufu out of Chicago. And in there, the brother talked about the conspiracy to destroy Black boys. Now, at that time, it was fourth grade. So, of course, I became a fourth grade teacher for a very long time because I wanted to see how they were, catching our kids up. And so throughout that time period, I learned a lot about just how the system is structured, how teaching is administered, how discipline is administered, uh, how students are specifically targeted, you know what I mean, and just how we have a situation where the majority of black kids are reaching the third grade not being able to read. And so there are a group of circumstances that come together that are systemic, right? And there's a very methodical approach to it, primarily in the form of standardized testing. People leave that part out, but um, the standardized test is a way in which they take a racially biased assessment and they use it to determine how successful academically our students are. Um, One thing that sticks out in mind is the word picture. They'll have a question that has the word picture in it. And you know, in certain communities, a pitcher is something you put juice in, or and you put it in the refrigerator and you drink out of it. Well, without that context for kids in urban environments, where a pitcher might be pitcher on the wall, it could be a baseball pitcher. There are a lot of different words for that. That question would be wrong, and that's just one basic example. But imagine that happens systemically every year. If you don't know about Texas testing, it's high stakes, right? It's high stakes testing. Um, there's an article that talks about how that third grade test score is used to predict and determine future beds in the local prison industry. And so we know that there's a direct link between our kids not being able to read and write properly and them becoming future inmates in some correctional institution. And so my work has been uh, primarily for the last 20 years, how does it work? Because my present work is the dismantling of that, right? So the idea of how do we stop them from catching our kids up in this system. I've learned recently that they are now targeting second graders. So our kids are as young as 6 and 7 year olds now, and they're set on that course to prison. Okay, and so that's kind of where you know we focus, but it's more outside of the school. It's more bringing supplemental access to different types of educational opportunities to kids who, in the school, because testing is high stake, testing is priority, teachers and administrators and counselors and other people don't have time to really give our kids what they need for a holistic and well-rounded education. And so we essentially put together workshops that provide social emotional development for our children. We always say we feel like we can build a better human being than what the current educational system is producing, right? More well-rounded, more self-aware with knowledge of self and their spiritual space, and more knowledge of what's going on in the world around them. And so we have programming that directly targets youth to give them that kind of education for future empowerment and enfranchisement. And so we're very grassroots in the sense of we are the point of contact. Like we are the boots on the ground. We are the ones who do the work. We're educators. We're a team of educators, mentors, fathers, um, people who have gone through this system. I grew up a poor kid with a single mother. So I know the system because I'm from the system. You know what I mean? And so I share what I've learned and how I was able to navigate through it with the youth, and in hopes that they will be able to take what I can impart on them and utilize it in a way where they too can kind of navigate through successfully. And so that's kind of where we are. But the school to prison pipeline is a very real thing. I've witnessed it firsthand. I've observed it firsthand, and I've fought for a long time to kind of save as many as I can from that ill fate.
Another program that, and it's along the same lines. You were talking about how young the system starts to criminalize and attempt to use these predatory tactics, and that is, I guess, kind of a preventative measure that you're taking. But you also, I know that you brothers and sisters also deal with a number of youth who, at a very young age, are already suffering from those predatory tactics. Actually, the first event that I remember I had the privilege of attending with you and Imam Sharif is when you were having your weekly, I don't want to say class because it was more of a powwow, where you had a number of young brothers and sisters who teenagers who are already have kind of falling into this cycle of criminalization, and you guys are trying to get them to stop. And that was the eyes program, I believe.
Right.
Can you and I witnessed you and Imam Sharif, really connect with these young people on a personal level. And I know that many of these young brothers even said that they don't have fathers in their lives. And so it's very powerful what you were doing. Can you explain what the eyes program is and how you guys go about that? I think that would really benefit the community.
Absolutely, and thank you for the opportunity. Alhamdulillah for this. Um, we've been running this for about 2 years. It's called the Educating Youth Empowerment System, and essentially, it's a workshop that we put on. It's a 10-week workshop that we put on. When you visited the workshop, you visited one of them. Um, we work with the juveniles who have been in front of a judge for some charge that they've received, and they have community service hours. So we put together a program that essentially operates off the idea of we give you community service to teach you how to be a service to your community, right? And so we flip it as opposed to them going and sweeping floors or wiping windows and things of that nature. They get with us and we get in the workshops, and in the workshops we talk about, like you said, the fatherlessness. A lot of them experience that. I know what that journey is like, so a lot of times is healing for me as well. And so we talk about fatherlessness, we talk about motherlessness, we talk about how mass incarceration has impacted them as children, because they're growing up in the midst of having a father that's absent because he's in prison, or having a mother that's absent because she's in prison. And those are very powerful people to have being taken out of your lives. Many of them don't have grandparents. I know the immigrant population, from what I know about the brothers and sisters, you all are very close knit. Those family bonds are very important towards the success as individuals and collectively. And so imagine, if you can, dealing with groups of young people who have, if you take the from grandparents to them, they may only have two or three family members that are intact and actively involved in their lives, and some of them might be just a sibling. And so what we do is we are actually a mentoring program. We first and foremost feel like we got to fill or become surrogates in that gap of what's missing in the adult guidance. And then from there, we offer them opportunities to creatively express the way that the emotions are running, how they're feeling, what are they thinking about the things that are happening in their lives. And so we use music, we use theater, we use, creative drawing and poetry, whatever it takes. We try to use it all to use it as a therapeutic way in which they process and deal with, the stress of not having their whole family intact.
And can you also tell us about the Fathers of the Hood program?
The Fathers of the Hood program is essentially an advocacy program. And in the Fathers of the Hood program, we pretty much realize it and recognize that there are fathers who want to be a part of their kids' lives, their children's lives, right? They want to be active. They want to, you know, do their part and fulfill their role. However, they might lack the proper education or understanding of what that means. They might, be caught up in child support and other ways in which, they just don't have access to their children. And so what we do is we come together and we discuss what's happening emotionally. We discuss, what's happening with the way that they're perceiving or thinking about this situation. We provide brotherhood. We provide, therapeutic circle in which we can all share. Frederick Douglass said it is easier, to build strong children than to repair broken men. But I believe that we can actually raise strong children by, really doing that work that's necessary and repairing, us as broken men. And we each one reach one, each one teach one. We come together and we pull together so that we're all strengthened by one another's struggle, and get resources to them so that they're able to get access to their children. So that's the Fathers in the Hood program.
And I think that I know that having sat with you and the brothers and discussing the kind of the strategy and the vision, I know that it's a very comprehensive idea. You guys aren't just
Yes.
doing abstract programs. There's an
Right.
actual agenda behind it, and I want to come back to you in a minute to discuss
Okay.
the political and the economic perspective that you have. But one thing that I want to mention is that in the past few weeks, a lot of brothers have reached out to me and to a couple others and said, we want to go into the hood and we want to start a program. We want to go into the hood and we want to, do something to help people from going down this path or whatever. And these are essentially people who their heart's in the right place, but they have
Right.
absolutely no street cred or anything like that. And the first step that I always say is identify a masjid within the African American community over there that's doing the work, and just go and show them that you mean that you're dedicated to this. When we in ICNA CSJ here in Dallas, myself and brother Firaz, we developed this whole program. We wanted to go into the hood and start this program. We had no reputation within in the hood, right? But we came down to Oak Cliff. We saw Masjid Al Quran. We came in, not the first time, not the second time, but when you brothers saw that we came back the third time, that's when I remember we really built a connection, and that's critical. And Imam Khalid, I want to ask you that the work that Brother Jamil is talking about. How important is that for Muslims in America? And the reason I'm asking you is because you accepted Islam in this country when it was very common knowledge that a Muslim is not someone who's spiritually close to God, but a Muslim is someone who actually fights against injustice. So can you
Yeah,
can you speak to that, please?
sure. That's a very good question. I'll approach the question in a kind of different way. I think that Muslims in America, particularly in this country, we have to understand that the social emphasis in Islam is not for depending upon the government to fund or to operate programs on behalf of the needy and the oppressed. Uh, that Islam, the Quran, and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is that we take care of our neighbors. Like if you go to bed bloated, you eat so much you just fall asleep, and then your neighbors, and not necessarily the person living next door to you, but those who you are aware of their circumstances and conscious, we can go to sleep knowing get bloated bellies as a Muslim. This is not a social justice issue. This is a matter of faith that Allah and the Prophet
Absolutely.
have made it a mandate for us to
Absolutely.
have these kinds of individuals, and it should be coming from us. So when we do something like what Brother Jamil, what you all are doing, this is a basic expression and requirement of us as Muslims. And so
Absolutely.
the larger number of Muslims who understand this will understand that they're not going on like a Christian mission trip where you're going somewhere to save the natives in something. I mean, these are our neighbors, regardless of what the zip code you live in and the zip code that they live in. These are our neighbors. And what I know to be the case, Imam, Brother Jamil, Deputy Imam Jamil mentioned Jawaza Kunjuf. I
Right.
mean, I'm sitting probably 6 feet from about 6 or 7 of his books,
Yeah.
right now.
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
mean, he was and he was writing this stuff a number of years ago.
Hmm.
And it was really insightful to read these kinds of things and get motivated. But I honestly believe that has to be a mind shift, a change the way that we think and approach the kind of work that you are describing. And this issue of uh, outside intervention, I mean, that we have to do something. We see a problem and then try to see what we can do to try to help correct the problem. One of the biggest turnoffs in my years just in community work, one of the biggest turnoffs for folks who are in need of some type of social assistance, whether it's in education or just civilizational kinds of things. How do you live? How do you dress? And whatever it is, that turn-offs for a number of folks who are benefiting or getting these services is the attitude that many come into these neighborhoods with. I just relate to in the community where I live. I mean, I live in an urban environment. Mosque, where I attend, is in the urban environment, and it really, befuddles me when I see folks coming through the neighborhood, from various Christian denominations, Mormons, and all kinds of folks. They target particular communities for their missionary work, and alhamdulillah, they do some great work in the community. I guess what I'm trying to get to is that that enthusiasm for all of the young brothers and sisters who want to come into the community don't come in there with some kind of savior or missionary mentality. Come in, like you said, Musab, you come one time, you come two times, you come three times. And, folks may say, well, maybe this dude is serious. But don't, like, I'll say, I think one of Elijah Muhammad's books was "Our Savior has arrived." Don't come in like we the saviors in the community, but just come in and see what can we do to help. What resources, human, financial, and otherwise, can we put at the disposal of Brother Jamil and others in these communities to help them further what they're doing? If we have an idea where this idea may help, if there are a pool and sisters with certain organization skills or backgrounds, or IT backgrounds, or whatever it is that we have to offer, we need to go into the community. Let's put this at your disposal. We're not coming in to lead you, guide you, and all this other kind of nonsense that oftentimes, if we're not careful, do that. Let me share just one other quick thing. I remember a few years ago, I was talking with a brother in New York, and it's a well-intentioned brother. And I'm saying this because nobody on earth would know who I'm talking about other than the person. If he's watching this, he would know, he would remember the conversation. But the brother told me that, brother, because I was talking to him about lending your assistance, and brother, I went in the hood, and I offered myself, and people, I told them the first time I was there, I'm there to really, really help. And I tried to tell them, brother, maybe you should have said, well, I'm here not to necessarily help. I'm here to try to learn from you what it is that I can do. What do you need for me to really provide some genuine help, and not run in here like I'm some kind of savior, some area trying to save these people in this community.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that what you just said, Imam Khalid, is something that a lot of brothers and sisters, myself included, needs to hear. And what made it, and I think that is the attitude that we need to have. So with Brother Jamil, especially, it was very easy to have that attitude, because when we came in and we had this discussion, we realized that we're talking to a group of brothers who have everything figured out, but everyone could use some help. And so that's our role, to give you a hand. And Brother Jamil, I love the way that you always put it. I believe you talked about 4 points. Politics and economics are 2 points. Can you explain kind of the vision behind what you see, not just at Muslim Quran, but as a community organizer of South Dallas? What's your vision?
So, brother Imam Sharif and I, we've been at this for about 7 years. But like I told you, I've been on this mission as far as education is concerned for 20 plus years. And so we approach it as if it's a four birds kind of project. And so we've thought this out. This isn't, just a pipe dream. This is something that we spend or have spent years just He and I pounded it out, looking and wanting brothers and sisters to come and really see the vision of it. But we primarily approach it from a cultural perspective first, right? And then there's the educational perspective. And then you have your economics and then your politics, right? And so when we look at the Southern Dialysis sector, we know that for years it's been underserved, underrepresented, uh, under resourced for generations. When you Dallas is very unique in that I was listening to a brother yesterday, and it came to my attention that uh, Dallas public schools, Dallas Independent School District, wasn't desegregated until '78. I'm 45 years old, so in my lifetime, DISD was segregated, which means that if you think about what that means for the people haven't even been able to move freely in this city for 40 years. You see what I'm saying? That's how tight the grips have been for Black people in this city. And so now that we have the protests and now that Black Lives Matter, and I love it. You know what I mean? I love it. It seems like it's getting some momentum, right? I'm all for it. I don't really get involved in that part of it. That's not my wave. Uh, I'm for once the dust is settled and now the work begins, who's going to be there every day, right, to make sure that this community is taken care of, right? Because it's easy to go march for a few weeks. It's easy to go do that. Okay, you've done that. Now that work begins, right? We have families that have, I mean, we're talking war. We have families who war has been waged against them. And the families in Southern Dallas are broken. And so we look at this like, how are we going to repair what has been broken? This family has been chopped up, the fathers, the mothers, the children, the uncles, the aunties, the grandmother, grandfather, all the key parts of the family has been fragmented. When you look at it from a cultural perspective, we don't necessarily have any cultural connection. We think like Europeans, right? That's why we can't get things done. We have a mindset where we think the way they think, and the way they think does not serve us, right? We're a collective people. We still haven't figured that out. We still I. When we move to the educational piece, you go, you have a few Barack Obama Male Leadership Academy, which is in the center of Southern Dallas in Oak Cliff. They are bragging because they have more graduates and more scholarships to top universities than anybody. But you took the cream of the crop and put them in one building, and then you left all the rest of them in the other buildings, and nobody is talking about where they are, what they're doing. And if you don't train that cream of the crop to go out, get that education, to bring it back to the community, to be of service of some sort to the upliftment of the community, you've given very valuable resources away to a system, right? And so we take it from the cultural to the education. We talk about economics, right? I'm not talking about people hand me out, hand me out. We're talking about the reindustrialization of Black people. We're talking about creating whole economies from pulling it out the ground to manufacturing, distribution, and retail. We're talking about creating economic enterprise for the Black community so that this dependency on things outside of us doesn't exist anymore. We're talking about creating something that's self-sustaining, self-sufficient, and we can grow our kids in some sort of pride around something that they produce, they retail, and we're no longer in that we're just consumer loop, right? As long as you're a consumer only, then your whole economic and political game is lost, right? If you're a consumer, politicians don't move for consumers, right? You got to be able to produce something to have any political say. We should be growing our own politicians. They should be coming out of the schools in their community already knowing that they're set up to go represent their community in the school board and the city council. It should really be very intentional and very direct. And that's kind of the programming. That's the kind of programming that we are creating or have created. And at this point in time, we just really need support and mostly in financial resources. Brother and Sharif and I, Iman Sharif, always say, if we didn't have to, work jobs, you know what I mean, outside of the work that we do for the community, we would be able to serve the community better. So the idea of, we need operational budgets, we need transportation, we need supplies. There's so many things that we need. We need expertise, like Imam Khalid said. It's like we have all of these needs that we have, and you don't have to come down here and reinvent the wheel. You just have to come in and connect, your part to the train that's already in motion, and we can keep it pushing and really get some things done, inshallah.
And I think what you just said. I think that was the most impressive part about what I saw you brothers doing is that you know you don't have a huge budget that you're working with. Most of the biggest thing is, I mean, you guys have the manpower, and that's how you make it happen. But I wanted to ask you another question. Is that I think that a lot of times you get people that come in and want to contribute financially,
Mhm.
but there are strings attached. Uh,
Yes,
and
yes,
how does that
we've
work?
had that experience.
And even
Yeah.
even with your discussions with the political groups or political leaders, that happens also, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, it's kind of that white savior thing, and I've always been very disheartened in this work because even in the way that resources are distributed, it's still white supremacy. It's still black folks going to white folks asking for money. They still having control of the resource, have control of all the resources, and so it's this idea of where can we get funding for the social justice work that we do without anybody trying to tell us how to do what we do. We've educated ourselves. We have degrees and background. We have years of experience. We have expertise and experience required and necessary to do this work that we're doing. All we need is people to come around it, put in your own experience and expertise so that we can work collectively. That's really all we need.
And one more thing I wanted to ask you. Last time when I was there, I think last week, 2 weeks ago, we had a discussion during the grab and go. Those 2 hours that we were there, it was a, it was an interesting discussion. Some sparks were flying. But you spoke about an
Absolutely.
issue called community consciousness, and you alluded to
Right.
that when taking the cream of the crop, and then can you explain that kind of that community consciousness, that concept to us? What it is that you like? What is the ideal person that you would like to produce?
So when we deal with our kids, I'll just tell you in action when we're working with the youth, um, we have a map that we refer to, and on the map is it's called the Petrie map, and the map is divided in half, and it tells the tale of two cities. One side of the map has a city, and there's no greenery; it's all dirty. The streets are filthy. It's drug avenue and incarceration lane and dropout boulevard. So you have all of these streets, right, that are on that side, and it all is a huge path that leads to the criminal justice system. And it talks about how 7 million plus, African American people are incarcerated or involved in the criminal justice system in some way. And at the top of that side, there's the penitentiary, and then there's the cemetery. Then, in contrast, there's the other side. And the other side has Opportunity Way and Job Boulevard and Education Road and Legacy Boulevard. Like there's all these amazing streets, and there's greenery and trees and family, and it just leads to all of the success path and prosperity in life. And that's the tool that we begin our instruction from. And when I talk about community conscious, the idea is, what do you want to do? We ask the kids this essential question: what do you want to do? Do you want to? First, we ask them which side they live on. Then we ask them which side would they like to live on if they had the choice, right? And so initially, we had many that would say, "I want to live on the good side, the side where all the opportunities are." And then we had a few, who picked it up and they said, "I want to live on the brown side, but I want to do something to change that side for the better, right? Something where I can plant some seeds and grow some greenery, right? Something where I can, you know, become a father and take care of my kids. Something where I can, really be a mentor or inspiration for somebody, get a good education. Like I want to change that side." And so when I talk about that collective consciousness, it's kind of reflected in that map is how do you take the environment in which you grew up in or are growing up in and use what you have as far as what you've been blessed with and your talents, you know what I mean, your gifts, your education. How can you use what you have to make that side better, as opposed to trying to escape that side? So how can I be a benefit to my community? How can I serve my community? What issues are, pressing my community that I can, really help to resolve? We talk about, defunding the police, department here in Dallas. And one key thing that I always talk about, we have a relationship with the Police Activities League, which is a part of DPD, but it's the part that's supposed to be the community outreach part. So my thing was, instead of us defunding it, why don't we send funds to the Police Activity League, which allows them to do community outreach programs such as the one that we have, that we have youth basketball programs. We have, of course, the eyes program, and the fathers in the hood. We have all of these programs that we're struggling with funding to even operate. And so the idea is, instead of spending money to militarize, DPD, why don't you put that budget line and create it for that Police Activity League and allow us to be able to do the programming? Because if we're able to do the community programming by working with the minds, the spirits, the consciousness of our children, you won't need those military grade weapons that you buy, because we'll actually use that energy to create something better that's going to benefit this community. And so that's kind of how we approach it all. And like I said, it's a well conceived plan. Right now we just lack the resources, the operational budget. We just lack what we need on that end, to really get it up and operational like it can be, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Imam Khalid, I wanted to, as we're wrapping up, I wanted to come back to you and ask you kind of a personal question, actually. In this discussion of community consciousness, you were a young man that came out of Winston-Salem. You did go away for education, and your life changed, traveled the world. Why did you decide to move back to Winston-Salem, North Carolina?
Well, a couple of reasons. One, um, which may not be the primary reason, I just started having children, and I had two very young daughters. And I did not think that Washington, D.C., given what was going on in Washington, D.C., it was fine for me, fine for my wife, but I felt that the environment I grew up in would be good for my children, so I came back. But another reason is that I wanted to come back with share some experiences that I had the almost decade that I had been away from North Carolina. So it sort of motivated me to come back. But if you allow me to make one point, because I see we're about out of time here, and that point is that I think a law, teachable moment that is going on right now. It's a teachable for people who've been here all their lives, but I think even more so, it's a teachable moment for the immigrant Muslim community in America, because we can talk and I can talk to people blue in the face, but what is unfolding before our eyes right now is something that no lecture, no book can teach you. And this groundswell, this outcry against the systemic and structural violence that has been done to the African American community in particular, I think it couldn't be articulated in a better way than what people are seeing unfold on the streets and unfold in the halls of Congress and the city council governments and all over America today. This is a teachable moment for the American people. It's an educational, teachable moment for those of us who are indigenous, not indigenous, the Native Americans, but who were born and have centuries of history in this part of the world. But it's also a teachable moment for our immigrant Muslim brothers and sisters to understand that Black folks have not just been crying, victim, help us, we're so pitiful, and all of this. There is something called structural racism, that the African American community has been victimized by this from over 400 years now. And that now I think that if we stand in this teachable moment, all of us will come out more compassionate, more with greater understanding, and a greater willingness to serve those who may not have known needed our assistance and help before.
Jazakallah khair, Imam Khalid. Brother Jamil, as we conclude, I wanted to ask you if there's any closing words of advice, remarks, or if anyone wants to in somehow help Mathil Quran and your efforts any way that they can.
Uh, in closing, I just want everyone to understand that, it's cliche, but I really want us to think about it. And this idea that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we really need to take that uh, and really let that sink in and understand that, this fight is for us all. All of us who are believers and want to do what's right. This is your fight. This is your struggle. This is where you can assert yourself and insert yourself into a movement. You can go to Facebook. We at Mashat Al Quran. We are currently working on getting a web site put together for the masjid. We are retooling. Um, we are really trying to get set up and established. So once again, if there are any of our brothers and sisters who want to offer IT assistance to us, we really want to. We're at a point where we really need to create an online presence for the work that we're doing, and so uh, I would just say that's the biggest need at this time.
And if anyone would like to contribute or help in any way, you can even reach us at info@icnacsj.org, and we'll be sure to put you in touch with Brother Jamil and Imam Sharif and the masjid. And I just want to thank both Brother Jamil and Imam Khalid for your time. May Allah bless you all. And I want, for those listening, I want to thank you for tuning in and just keep an eye on ICNA CSJ. We have more things coming up. So with that, we'll conclude. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك ونشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم.
Wa alaikum
Alaikum
salam.
assalam.
Salam.